Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Hamza Islam, and this week is going to be this week I have a very interesting guest. As you guys may have remembered, if you saw the first episode, I'm a third year student at Ohio State. And so this is the first time I'm going to be talking to someone who goes to the same school as me. So it's going to be a very, I guess, I wouldn't say comforting, but it's going to hit home in a way. And I'm very excited. My guest this week is Andrew Pierce, who's the current Undergraduate Student Body President at The Ohio State University. That's his official title, but I hope that's not that's not his whole thing. I mean, that's a really long title. In addition to his role as Student Body President, he is also the co-founder of the Worth Foundation. It's an organization that looks to improve civics education and also hoping that it gives young people or people in general the tools they need in order to create change in their respective communities. I've known Andrew for a very long time, and so I feel that he is the perfect guest as I continue on with this podcast, given that this is the third episode. And something that I really respect about him, and it reminds me a lot of my guest last week, Illinois State Representative Nabila Syed. She has officially been inaugurated as of this recording. The awareness or the emphasis on creating change from a local level. I think for many people, and I promise this podcast is not a political podcast. It's just more about understanding people's journey. And Andrew has had an amazing journey to where he is today. But the emphasis on the fact that many people want to create change and they automatically think national or sometimes even state. But oftentimes, if you want to start change, you have to start small. And oftentimes that starts in your own backyard. And Andrew has emphasized that before I met him. He's emphasized that every time I meet him, he just wants to find a way to help people in face-to-face conversations. And I've met him many times. He's always been helpful. So I'm grateful that he said yes to this podcast. And the fact that he's the first person from Ohio State, I hope he feels honored by that. And as you can tell, I'm in Buckeye gear. It says Buckeye Nation. And so I hope you guys enjoy the episode. And I'm really looking forward to having a great conversation with Andrew Pierce. Andrew Pierce, welcome to the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Firstly, congratulations. You are the first guest of the podcast from Ohio State. I don't know if that's something you should be proud of, given that it's only the third episode, but to be able to talk to someone who goes to the same university as me, I thought, like, why not have the best person possible? So thank you so much. Really.
Thank you. And I mean, hey, happy to be here on season 1. And thank you again for, having Ohio State here. Go Bucks.
Yeah, of course. And secondly, I want to talk about how as I was getting ready for this podcast, I was thinking to myself, how am I going to introduce Andrew? Because you are the Undergraduate Student Body President. And so I was thinking to myself, do I have to say Undergraduate Student Body President at The Ohio State University, Andrew Pierce, welcome to the podcast. And you just say Andrew Pierce. So thank you for saving me more time and more breath, because that is such a long title for you.
A lot. Andrew. Yeah, that's all good.
So when you're at Ohio State or when you're in student government setting, how are you addressed as? Because to me, because whenever I meet you, you just say, call me Andrew. But in student government settings, is it same thing, or do they have to include that really long title?
No, I think in student government settings it's very, not necessarily informal, but casual. We're all between 18 to 22, 23, 24, 25. So it's like, just call me Andrew, because I think it demystifies this idea of, a president or like you're higher or, the others. It's just call me Andrew and let's get to the real work of helping students.
I like that. You want to be known for just being a human being that wants to help Ohio State rather than just being like, I am the president and I'm like this way. I respect that. Let's talk about who you are as a person. You are someone who's very passionate about civics education, but let's talk about the role as undergraduate student body president. there are a lot of people, and I, in the introduction, talked about how this is the role you are, the role you have, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about it. And I think there are people that know about the role, but there are also people that may not know as much or know really nothing at all. When
Mhm.
you're talking to people that don't know much or don't know anything at all about what your role is, how do you explain to people what an undergraduate student body president is, and more importantly, why that's important to the undergraduate body, not just at Ohio State, but also in different colleges around the country?
Yeah, so I think even in answering that question, looking at the reason why student governments were even formed in the first place. So looking at our history as an organization formed during the progressive activism of the late 60s, early 70s, we see that on various campuses across this country, whether it be Berkeley, um, Kent State, our university, the Ohio State University, or even, Columbia, students were having conversations around what does it mean to be a student, but also in an era of mass political upheaval, right? So we have Vietnam War, we have Roe v. Wade, we have all these things coming together and really culminating on college campuses around um, liberal identities, conservative identities, and really students needed a place not only to articulate these views, but more importantly, have a pointed organization to tailor, but also point and advocate for their positions, right? So we see at the Ohio State University, our student government is formed literally during the Vietnam War to be a part of university governance. So to really have a hand not only in curriculum development, but also making sure that students have adequate housing, have adequate healthcare, have access to affordable textbooks, right? So students advocating for themselves, and really this is the main reason in existence for student government is to have students advocating on their own behalf to an administration such as the Ohio State, right? So rather than having a professor or a faculty say, hey, my student came to me and said XYZ, you have students going into these spaces with a President Johnson, with a Dr. Melissa Shivers, with a Provost Gilliam, and saying students need these various resources, right? So in my role as president of the undergraduate student government, I am charged with essentially not only leading this organization, but serving as the chief spokesperson for almost 50,000 undergraduates here at the Ohio State University, right? So whether that's, like I said, talking with the President Johnson or various members of the administration, my role is to take the views of the student body and then articulate them and, more importantly, advocate for them at various levels of the university.
When I first heard that you were our new student body president, I don't know why I did air quotes. When I first heard that you were a student body president, I think that election, it was just you were the only real candidate that won, but I still felt that once I heard that you were going to be our next student body president, undergraduate student body president, I really didn't know how I felt about you at first, because I was like, oh, here's a guy, because I met you while you were campaigning. You Here's a guy that loves Spider-Man, that loves basketball, that loves all these, leisure activities, and you love talking to people. But then as I got to meet you, it almost felt like it's one of those situations where it makes sense. Like, yeah, like, oh, this person was born, I wouldn't say born to be a student body president, but it fits the role. And I say that because you are very passionate, as I mentioned, about making a difference in your community, and not just at the national and state level, but you emphasize the importance of starting change or creating change from a local level. And that's something that many people often forget, because a lot of people want to create change. But oftentimes we neglect the fact that change starts from our communities, or oftentimes our own backyard. And I want to know, like, how often you try to emphasize that
Yeah.
going forward.
So I think it's very easy in an institution like Ohio State to, and especially with my role being just a 1-year term, it's very easy to get into the weeds and just thinking about results and driving towards a goal, whether it be an advocacy goal, a funding goal, or whatever it may be. But I think the reason why relationships are so important, one thing that I've learned in my leadership journey, is that it's a lot easier to build coalitions and build communities toward targeted approaches when you have ways to relate with them, and also to ways in which you can just be people first, right? So I think a lot of times in our politics and how polarized we are, it's very easy to see someone for just their political view, or for just their what they may see on Instagram, but do you truly know that person? And that's something that I'm continually challenging myself with, because I'm by no means a master or a perfectionist at that. But I think that grassroots level change, one, is hard. It takes a long time because, again, coalition building isn't just like a one and done thing. You need to actually like invest time into relationships. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times, at least with USG, we are pivoting to an organization that prides collaboration and that prides relationships in order to advocate for students. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I mean, you obviously love where you're from, and you have been a part of two different organizations, or not organizations, but you've really found a way to be able to spread awareness and try to engage people in civics education. You are a co-founder of the Worth Foundation, in which you look to improve civics education and also give young people, or just people in general, the tools they need to create change in their communities. And you're also a member of the Columbus Police Chiefs Advisory Panel. And talk to me about what it means to be a part of change. I know that's such a cliche thing, but when you're going there, when you're out there trying to talk about how to move the city, we're going city, how to move the city going forward, what it means to you to be part of that conversation, and also elaborate on like how, feel free, because I know I kind of just gave people a general idea, but also feel free to talk about like the Worth Foundation and your role as a member of the Columbus Police Chief Advisory Panel.
Right. Well, that's a long question if you want a long answer. Okay. I mean, I guess I'll start with my background. Ohio State is very personal to me because not only of my history with it, but because of my family's history of it. So a lot of people may not know, my grandparents, my great-grandparents came here. My great-grandmother was from the coal mines of West Virginia. My great-grandfather grew up as a sharecropper in North Carolina. They both came here in high school, and were essentially, given opportunities to thrive, but also to work and build a family and a community, right? Now, because they were Black, they were not always offered the top tier opportunities, right? My grandmother in high school had a 4.0 GPA, National Honor Society, but because of who she was as a Black woman, was scrubbing floors and being a janitorial staff here at the Ohio State University, along with my grandfather. So literally, my connection with this university is from my grandparents being custodians here, literally with professors walking past them, students walking past them as they clean toilets, to my parents meeting here, both on academic scholarship and athletic scholarship. My dad ran track here. My mom got 4 degrees from here. My mom is then being pregnant with me while she's taking classes here and pursuing a master's degree, for then me to pop out with my 4 siblings. Laziness is essentially disrespect to our ancestors. And I just want to say that anything that I do on this campus as undergraduate student body president, but also with the Worth Foundation and Chief Advisory Panel, is not only respect to them for the sacrifices that they have made to get me to this point, but more importantly, to push the next generation forward, right? So even with USG, that's maybe my student thing, but with the Worth Foundation, which was a nonprofit I created in high school, it was more so because civics education is really just a high level in high school. So we know our federal policymakers, our executive, our legislative, our judicial, but do we really know, okay, when Donald Trump won in 2016, he lost the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote. And a lot of my high school friends and I were like, well, why is that the case, right? My mom is a poli-sci professor. I knew, but it wasn't as taught throughout our high schools about, what is this difference? So that signified a gap, right? And more specifically, we had all this energy from, I would say, just 2016, even up to now, about what does it mean to create change within the democratic institutions that we have, right? Protesting is one thing, and that's a very integral part of a democracy. But what happens after the protest, right? What happens in the negotiations? What happens when you're sitting down with the policymakers and going over the agenda, right? So that's really what the Worth Foundation was created to do, was to not only empower high school students to walk into those rooms equipped with not only the confidence, but the knowledge on how democratic institutions work, but also to mobilize the leadership aspect of it, to mobilize their collective communities for change, right? So that meant going to Columbus Alternative High School when I was in high school, and mobilizing around building repairs. So the building didn't have air conditioning. So students there rallied around that specific goal and went to their board of education and said, hey, we need air conditioning in our schools, and here are the hundreds of students and news media to prove it, right? democratic institution being that school board, but also that coalition and community building piece within the school, coming together to create that change, right? Transitioning now to a college student, I teach civic education, both within Columbus city schools, but also within the city of Columbus and also Grandview Heights School. So more so teaching students, not necessarily the organizing aspect, because my schedule has gotten a little bit busier than it was in high school, but teaching students, various levels of, freedom of speech, whether it may be how to create a policy agenda and stuff like that. And then, going to the chief advisor panel that was birthed out of the social justice movements and the Black Lives Matter movements of 2020, advising the city of Columbus not only on how policing should be, but more importantly, how the citizenry of Columbus and also our communities see policing and community and public safety going into the rest of the 21st century, right? So that meant bringing on our first African-American female chief Elaine Bryant, and also revitalizing and helping her with the org structure of the police department to ensure that it's not only safe, but also community-facing and community partnering and community-led. So long answer, but just to circle it back, I do all of this to advance the next generation, but also to pay tribute to my ancestors who sacrificed for me.
No, firstly, that's on me for asking you a long question. I mean, because I think that these are some of the things that really have shaped you into the person you are today. And I also respect the fact that I think, especially when it comes to college students, where the views on family are mixed, because you are someone that is very passionate about the fact that it's not just your mom and dad, it's the whole family. And the last word you like, the word laziness is not in your dictionary. It's about hard work. It's about going out there and not just making a name for yourself, but making a name for yourself because you want to be part of I would say part of the solution. You want to be able to go out there and make from a community perspective better today than it was yesterday, and you want to make it better tomorrow than it was today.
I mean, in our family, it was never an option not to serve, right? So even though, like I said, my grandparents were custodians here, they instilled within my mother the fact that you will give back, you will always volunteer. So, my mom and dad were always like, you're gonna serve and you're gonna volunteer. There was never a summer where we're not volunteering or giving back to a community, whether it be with the youth. Youth Leadership Academy here at The Ohio State University with Life Sports. So I was a camp counselor there, working with the City of Columbus Parks and Rec, or even just, working with the city on just civic education stuff, right? There's always ways to give back, and that was instilled from my great grandparents because I knew the value not only of service, but the value of an education with that service. So.
When you're out there talking about civics education and how to have the tools needed to be able to go out and speak out about something. I think one of the most difficult things that we often fall into, but I think is for the greater good, is conflict. You might have one way of finding you may have one solution, but someone may have a different solution. And then when it comes to the police chief, I think, especially because you talked about how a lot of this happened because of what happened in 2020. And I think some people have different views on police. Some people say we should defund the police in its entirety. We should put more money on police, or wherever the spectrum is. But two things, and this is a long question as well. But firstly, I wonder how often you meet people that have benefited from your organization but may have different viewpoints, and how do you try to make sure that you find a way to come up with a compromise to go forward, and also how you handle at times like trust, especially with police, where you're like, let's have these conversations, let's talk about how we understand that the relationship between the police and the community without having to say that we either support the police or we don't support the police at all. I know that's a difficult thing to talk about, but like, do you get what I'm trying to say? It's like having these discussions, but also conflict can be difficult in hopes of going forward.
Yeah, so I guess starting with your first question about people who come with the Worth Foundation, and then go off and do their own thing. The Worth Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, right? So we do not take any political stances. I think when our people come in, whether it be students or community members, we say that up front, right? So this is nonpartisan. We're not saying left, right, red, blue, up, down, left, right. We are essentially giving a framework for not only how to engage within the political process, but what are those political processes, right? So I may teach a class to my students on, hey, here's the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Brandenburg v. Ohio, various limitations on the freedom of speech, but also how you can use the freedom of speech within policy conversations. What you do with that information is up to you, right? So it kind of stops there, because I think that's the beauty of the democratic process, is that we have these institutions not only allow for participation, but allow for growth in that participation. So however an individual chooses to interact with those institutions in a nonviolent and productive and cooperative manner is like the bare minimum, the foundation, right? Whatever policy issues you choose to take with that is what is at your discretion, right? Or more importantly, the needs of your community, which I think transitions to your next question around trust with police, right? So at least in my role with the Chief Advisory Panel, we've seen 3 chiefs, ranging from Chief Quinlan all the way now to Chief Bryan, and it's very clear when leadership is open to transparency and honesty, but more importantly, community and relationship building, right? With communities and policing, I think that the overarching sentiment within at least our advisory panel is that it should be community-led, and that the police are public servants, right? So they should be serving a community, and really policing is at the discretion and at the behest of the community at which it serves, right? So in the city of Columbus being a very large, I think the way to build trust between police but also the communities is just to listen, right? What does a community need? How does a community feel safe? And having those tough conversations, not shying away from them, are going to be, I think, the best way that we move forward as a society.
Speaking of leadership in community, here you are as the Undergraduate Student Body President at the Ohio State. That's one of the few times where I will say the whole thing. But let's talk about the beginning in terms of what made you realize that this is something that you wanted to do. Because I've met student body presidents in the past, whether it's at Ohio State or in different colleges, and I'll hear, like, I guess, nightmare stories where it's like how it can often affect like their overall well-being, given that how much work that they have to do. And yeah, I will admit, oftentimes I undermine I wouldn't say, when I say undermine, I don't want to say like it's like the easiest job in the world, but it's like, it's a job where I feel like it's difficult, but then once I hear like how difficult it is, it makes me realize like, oh, this is a really, it can be a daunting, it can be a difficult job to, I guess, take over. But I want to know, what made you realize that this was something you wanted to do, and what made you continue to go forward, even if you knew like some of the things that you may have to sacrifice from your personal life, because it changes you in a way.
Well, I take an 8 a.m. strength training class just now, so my gym time in. No, so I mean, looking at USG as an organization, one, if you look at its membership, it has over 250 people, right? So a lot of human capital. In terms of funding from the university, our budget is around, in the hundreds of thousands. So enough to be, if we were just alone, it would be enough to be classified as federally classified by the tax code as a nonprofit, like a mid-sized nonprofit. So the organization itself has a lot of resources at its disposal to help, but more importantly, to advocate and to provide support to the large student body at the Ohio State University. And I think why I wanted to come into this role was more importantly because I was noticing, not only coming out of COVID, but an opportunity for this organization to be at the forefront of student support and student aid. As we come out of the pandemic and go not only from Zoom, but to in-person conversations, we need organizations that not only will put their money where their mouth is, but more importantly, will be able to build the relationships and the coalitions and the networks to actually advance student concerns. And I believe that with my experience, not only with the Worth Foundation, but with the Chief Advisory Panel, but just as a student, as a Columbus community member, I was uniquely set to understand the power, but more importantly, the influence that the Ohio State University has, and how undergraduate student government can be used to not only push this organization, but also to push this institution in this city. So like I said, being born in Columbus, Ohio, and going to high school and always been around Ohio State, that's kind of why I wanted to join this organization. And you talked about the difficulties and why I persist. And I think that's any reason why anyone in public service persists, because we know that there is a bigger goal and there's a bigger dream, right? So there's no loss on my end of thinking about my sacrifice when I know that it can help benefit someone else. And that's one of the major lessons that were taught to me, not only by my grandparents, but by my mother's, that when you're serving someone, it doesn't matter how tired you may be, because the effort that you put in will be able to help someone else tremendously more than you are sacrificing, right? So I may, have to like pile up the homework and stay up late, but I mean, if that means getting someone emergency assistance to pay their rent, it should be worth it, right? And I think that everybody in this organization comes with the mentality of, hey, I'm coming to serve and I'm coming to be of service.
You talked about in some in the beginning of the podcast where you are representing 53,000 undergraduate students, which for any college, I mean, I know student body presidency can be difficult, but then that number itself, 53,000, and if anyone who has gone to Ohio State, it doesn't feel like 53,000. It literally feels like Times Square at times, because there's so many people at Ohio State. But given the fact that you're representing so many undergraduate students, how do you try to make sure that the decisions that you make, because obviously I know that, yes, you are the undergraduate student body president, but you're also, it's not just like decisions just doesn't happen because of you. It's a collective effort. And so when you're trying to make Ohio State better, given that many people may have, I guess, mixed reviews on student government, or even they just don't even know that that exists, how do you try to then emphasize the importance of making, I guess, making the student undergraduate student experience rather better, given that there's so many people that you're trying to look after? Because that to me, I feel like that's what's terrifying at times. Like when I think I remember when I met you a couple of days when like fall semester started, I asked you like, how do you hold yourself together? Because 53,000, like if I have to look over 53,000 undergrad students, I wouldn't be able to do it. You know what I mean? So like that's why I was wondering, like, how do you try to like not only just try to make it go better, but also, try to make sure that you're not like, that you don't like lose yourself in that process.
Right. Well, I mean, first, it's not just me. So it's an entire organization. It's a team effort. So what you see from me is my team supporting me in that, right? So not only like an executive leadership team, but our various committee structures down to our freshmen who just joined in. So it's not just, I may be a chief spokesperson, but it's the entire organization of hundreds of people looking out for and advocating for students on this campus, right? So it's not just me. And I think that in a way to impact students, you have to look at areas in which all students can be impacted, right? So whether that's transportation with our campus to airport shuttle operation, whether that's access to news sources for education with our purchase of the New York Times subscription to allow all individuals at the Ohio State University a free subscription to the New York Times, or whether that's even looking at allocations and funding for student organizations and programming, right? So we provide grants and affordable learning grants to not only individual students to pursue, like, hey, if you're doing a research project and you don't have funding for this lab fee, you can apply to USG for funding. We will help cover that for you. Or if you're a student organization saying, hey, we want to put on this great event, we need funding for it, USG can help be a supporter in that, right? So looking at threefold needs of whether it be transportation, whether it be education, or even funding, those are various areas that can touch all students, regardless of your political background, whether you know about USG or you don't know about USG. I think the best way to affect change on such a large campus is to understand what are those programs, those policies, those advocacy campaigns that can touch every single person at the Ohio State University. And I think that with this administration, we've been able to do that.
You mentioned how student body presidency is a one-year term, And I know there are people who listen to this podcast who don't go to Ohio State. So I want to be able to I want to ask you, what are some of the things that you have done as a student body presidency, and then also given the fact that we are technically in like the midway point of your student body presidency, what are some things that you hope to, I think, right? Yeah, in a way, right?
So yeah, keep going.
No, okay. So I was gonna say, like, what are some of the goals that you hope to accomplish by the time your presidency ends?
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, well, we had a launch event in the first semester where we kind of laid out all of our goals and from campaign promises to what we wanted to do with our vice president Derek Moore, who's been very integral in pushing the organization forward in terms of operations, but also efficiency. So if I were to say goals, the things that we have accomplished in the fall semester, we were able to give our largest amount of funding in our organization's history to student organizations, but also to student grants, right? So that was huge. Providing the New York Times subscription to all students to be able to access the news free of charge. That was huge. The campus to airport shuttle. So when students needed to get home from winter break, rather than paying for a $30 or $40 lift to the airport or waiting to catch a bus at a very early hour, or even missing their flights, we were able to help in collaboration with the Ohio State University's administration and planning office to provide transportation from campus to the airport. So those were like three of our big projects that we were able to actually get things done. I think looking forward to this semester, and I'm more so at this is like the third or fourth quarter of if this were a basketball game, because the next administration will be elected in March, and then I will be gone by the first week of April. That's when my term ends. So it's kind of like, and I've been in this since April of last year, so coming to the tail end. But I think if we were able to impact things in terms of the next 2 months would be, student funding for emergencies. So whether it be grants, more grant funding, additionally reproductive health care, so helping with the cost of reproductive health care. Also, 3, looking at ways in which to diversify cultural food options here on campus. But also 3, leaving room for innovation, right? So even if I have goals, they pale in comparison to if there's a very urgent need that the student body needs, that student government can then help and advocate for. So, yeah.
You mentioned your goals as a student body president, and I know that it's going to be a painful process, but there's going to be exciting times going forward. But you're also, like you mentioned, that this is a collaborative effort. And so when you look at some of the things as a member of student government, or as a member of as student government in its entirety, what do you think like student government goals are? Because I know you have your personal goals, but like how do you like what are some things you hope to do as like a team of some sort in making Ohio State better, for at least for the undergraduate population?
Yeah, I think continuing our list of successes and just riding that momentum from fall semester, being able to impact all students at the Ohio State University and finding those programs, whether it be through emergency funding, whether it be through food, healthcare, finding ways in which this university, but also our organization can help impact every single student on this campus. We're still working those out and then working out, what specific programs those could be. But I think we got some good things cooking.
I want to wrap up the podcast by talking about what's next for you, because you've obviously done a lot before Student Body Presidency with the Columbus Police Chief Advisory Panel, the Worth Foundation. You obviously have this mindset of just never, or just not being lazy. You've always got to find a way to make someone's life better. And you've done that before Student Body Presidency, and then you're doing it now. But as you're not just, it's not just the last few months of your term, but you're also the last few months of your, I feel like, because I think you said something about like you have your undergraduate and then I think like your master's as well. Are you doing that at the same time or something like
Yes.
that?
So it's a combined degree program. So
Yes.
it's a 5-year program, but we're doing it in 4 because, why not? So
But no, I would love to know, I want to know what's next for you in the future. What are some things that you hope to do for yourself, given that these are the types of things that have shaped you into the person you are today? And I know that going forward, that these are some of the things that you've learned or lessons you've learned will help you in creating maybe another Worth Foundation or whatever you want to do in the future.
yeah, so I mean, probably taking a break for summer vacation. But no, I'm hopefully gonna try to take some gap years before law school. So I want to go into constitutional or civil rights law. But in those two gap years, looking at jobs right now with educational equity, community engagement, and civic education focused nonprofits. So learning how to actually affect change from the nonprofit lens at a federal policy level. So whether that's, here or DC, New York, whatever it may be, wherever God takes me, that's where I'll go.
Well, I gotta tell you, I love talking to you. You are one of the coolest people I've met at Ohio State. You are an amazing friend, and I say that, and that sounds like a low bar, but I promise you that's not. And I know that wherever you go, that you are going to inspire a lot of people. You're going to make someone's life better. And I know when you talked about how it doesn't matter what you have to give up, as long as it makes someone's life better, that's the most important thing. And I respect everything that you said, and I can't wait to see all the great things you do. So, Andrew,
Oh,
thank you so much for joining the podcast, and enjoy the last few semesters, or sorry, last few semesters. Enjoy the last few months at Ohio State.
okay.
Hopefully, it's not painful.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. Oh my very goodness. This was awesome.
Appreciate it. That was my conversation with the Undergraduate Student Body President of The Ohio State University, Andrew Pierce. I really wanted to include that. I don't know why, but I really had a great time talking to him. And the fact that he was my first guest from The Ohio State University, it was, I'm glad that he was the person that was able to find time to be able to talk about his role as a student body or undergraduate student body president and his role in helping his local community. I think the one thing that I took away from the conversation, and I hope that you guys as well, is the fact that he is very proud of his family, and the fact that his family doesn't want to include the word laziness in their dictionary. That everything is about hard work and going out there and trying to make a life better. I respect that, and I think there should be more people that should be proud of their family. And sometimes, and it's weird because I talked about how it can be weird at times in college where the the idea is people should leave families because they want to live on their own. But people like Andrew talk about how it's important to honor the tradition, honor the culture, honor what your family has done in order to help you become the person you are. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does in the future after he graduates. I'm gonna miss him, but that's unfortunately college. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does during these last few months of his presidency, as well as his time in college. But if you guys liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow the podcast or follow our podcast at the OMCG podcast on Instagram. And that's our way of spreading the word out. So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Thank you guys for supporting the podcast. Keep on doing that because that's what we're going to need going forward. And I look forward to seeing you guys all in the next episode.